Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Meet the CEO. I'm Frederick Ansel. I am the Dean of UNSW Business School, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all tonight, our alumni, friends, and distinguished guests. As some of you know, I'm relatively new in this role. This is my first Meet the CEO in the Dean role, and it's a great privilege to be Dean of the best business school in Australia. Let me begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people, the traditional owners of the lands where we are meeting tonight, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, past and present, and their communities who have shared and practiced their teaching over thousands of years. We recognize Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's ongoing leadership and contribution, including to business, education, and industry. 2024 is a special year for us. We're not only marking 21 years of Meet the CEO, but we're also celebrating the 75th anniversary of UNSW itself. A meaningful time to reflect on our achievements and to look ahead to an exciting future. For the third consecutive year, UNSW Business School was ranked the #1 in the AFR BOSS Best Business School ranking. When you win 3 times in a row, it would be silly to pretend it's a coincidence. We are very proud, and I hope you all are too, to have earned a reputation for outstanding student outcomes. This success reflects the dedication of our academic and professional staff and the support of our 120,000-strong alumni network, industry partners, and advisors. Now, we are not intending to sit on our laurels. The best is yet to come. In the next years, we will be intensifying our efforts along 2 key priorities. First, careers that matter, and second, ideas that matter. Now, let me try to explain those 2 priorities using quotes from a famous Belgian. As you can probably hear from my accent, I'm not Australian. And the question I get asked most is where I am from. Well, I was born in the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, but on the French border, which explains this weird accent, which is a mix of French and Dutch. When I say I'm from Belgium, the second question I get asked the most is if there are any famous Belgians. Well, I invite you to cross the harbor, cross the botanical gardens to that other great museum, the Art Gallery of New South Wales, where you can now visit an outstanding exhibition by the famous Belgian painter René Magritte. And when visiting that exhibition on an early Sunday morning, I read 2 quotes that really stuck with me and that are relevant here. The first one was, "The finished picture is a surprise, and its creator is the first to be surprised." I would say the same about our students and alumni. We are not simply here to learn them a few skills or management recipes. Instead, we want to develop something in our students that they don't know yet that is there. We help them discover and realize their potential. Our job is not finished when students graduate. We want to stay close to our students over a lifelong career and surprise them by helping them discover what type of career and impact that they can have more than what they thought was ever possible. We aim to be a lifelong learning companion for careers that matter. The second quote by René Magritte is a reflection of the pessimistic outlook during the 2 world wars. In response to the dark and uncertain times, Magritte said, "My only wish is to be enriched by exciting new ideas." And today, I think we live in a time where many people have a similar yearning for new and fresh ideas? Can we find solutions to populism and polarization, declining economic growth and inequality, climate change and aging populations? That is the mission of UNSW Business School. Our business school academics are frequently called upon for public policy discussions, commissions, industry boards, and key events. By collaborating with top-tier global institutions, world-renowned scholars, and leaders from government, private sectors, and non-profits, more than ever, our research insights will be focused on tackling grand challenges and coming up with new ideas and solutions that truly matter to business and society. We will be investing in ideas that matter. This year, as part of UNSW's 75th anniversary celebrations, we are delighted to share a special edition of Business Think. You probably know Business Think. I think everyone gets an email, regular email with all updates, new insight, new ideas from our academics, researchers, alumni, industry partners. And for this 75th edition, we've created this special paper edition that everyone can pick up as a sort of something to think about, to reflect on, and to remember this great year of celebration and this evening. So please feel free to take a copy home to remember this night. And today, of course, we are proud to continue the success of Meet the CEO, our flagship leadership series. Since 2003, it has brought our alumni and community together with some of the most influential leaders in business. Tonight, we're honored to have Scott Charlton, CEO of Sydney Airport, as our special guest. Scott will be joined by Ellen Derrick, Managing Partner of Deloitte Consulting Australia and one of our esteemed alumni and Business Advisory Council members. We're very grateful to everyone who submitted questions for Scott. With over 260 questions, this could be a very long night. With over 260 responses, we'll do our best to cover as many of the topics raised as possible, and there will also be a Q&A session at the end of the interview. Please note that tonight's event is being recorded, and the video will be available on the UNSW Business School website in the coming days. It is now my pleasure to welcome UNSW Chancellor, Mr. David Gonski, AC, to introduce our guest speakers. Please welcome Mr. David Gonski.
Thank you, Frederick. And on behalf of everyone at the university, I welcome each and every one of you here this evening. I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this wonderful gallery stands, and I pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and in the case of a university and business school, emerging. Ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to say to Frederick, firstly, he has a 100% attendance records at Meet the CEO. He's been to one, and there's only been one during his period. I've tried to emulate that. For me, I should have attended 49, and I think I've attended most of them. Can I also say to Frederick, you have guts to introduce that Magritte at the other place, which is a competitor to this one. As chairman of that place, thank you most sincerely. And finally, if I may just note, for absolute posterity, there are two important Belgians in this city at the moment, Magritte and Frederick Ansel. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very, very proud of Meet the CEO. That's why I go to it, and I enjoy it, and I learn a great deal. We've had enormous stars, and tonight we've got an extra good one. Let me firstly say, I don't care whether our university business school, is rated #1. I like that, it's reassuring. I know it's #1, and I know that it turns out the most magnificent people. Indeed, our questioner, who we'll hear about in a minute or two, is one of them. We're a wonderful business school. It's a great place to be, and I'm a little biased because I went to it. Ladies and gentlemen, let me start by giving you a bonus, a piece of advice from the Chancellor. If you are the chairman or chairperson of something, never agree to introduce your CEO. If you say nice things about them, a bright CEO, and this one's very bright, will remember that when pay time comes around. If you're nasty to him, you'll be in the sin bin for a while and probably won't get to talk to him for a long time, which is a problem. But like every rule, and note this down, there is an exception. If you respect your CEO, if you think they're excellent, if you think they're experienced, if you believe they are humble and you know they're intelligent, then you can introduce them, and you should make all those statements as your disclaimer, as I do tonight. It is a privilege for me to introduce Scott Charlton. He is the Chief Executive Officer, as you were told, of Sydney Airport. If you were thinking it was another airport, you might like to leave now. Sydney Airport's one of Australia's largest and most important pieces of infrastructure, with more than 44 million passengers annually going through it. Scott is an engineer by training. As I've said many times, the only problem with his CV is he didn't go to the right university, but as he wasn't even in Australia, I will give him that excuse. He has more than 25 years' experience in developing, funding, constructing, and operating infrastructure assets. And he's worked with some of the sector's leading ASX-listed corporations. Most of you would know, prior to joining Sydney Airport recently, he was the Chief Executive Officer, and a very successful one, at Transurban from 2012. Transurban is a leading infrastructure company with operations in Australia and North America. Between 2010 and 2012, he was the Chief Operating Officer of Lendlease's global operations. And from 2007 to 2009, he was the Chief Financial Officer at Leighton Holdings. Before that, if that wasn't enough, he spent 11 years at investment banking, 8 years of which at Deutsche Bank, culminating in the role of Managing Director, Head of Transport and Infrastructure, Asia Pacific. He was based then in Hong Kong. Previously, he was a Managing Director, Head of Project Finance there at Deutsche Bank, involved in many privatisations and public partnerships. Now, Scott will be interviewed by somebody I'd like to say is our own Ellen Derrick. She's one of our AGSM MBA alumni. She's a member of our Business Schools Advisory Council and gives her time both freely and wonderfully generously, and we really appreciate that. In her day job, which she doesn't have much time for because she's busy here all the time, but Ellen is the managing partner of consulting for Deloitte Australia and a member of Deloitte's National Executive. Prior to being appointed as managing partner consulting, Ellen was the national leader, public sector and public policy. She's more than 20 years of consulting experience behind her, and she's specialised in working with governments to achieve strategic policy outcomes. And if that's not enough, Ellen is also chair of Batyr, a for-purpose preventative mental health organisation and a member of the Corporate Mental Health Alliance of Australia. We have a powerful duo, 260 questions to get through, so I now call upon Scott and Ellen, and I welcome them effusively.
That's an old investment banking trick. You either give people money or recognition, and I think I just got recognition, so I'm not sure I'm going to get the money.
We're on your side tonight, Scott. We're going to make you look good. But thank you, David. And I have to say, it's a privilege to be invited back to host Meet the CEO. I'm up to number 3 in my attendance at these events, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion tonight. Let's see if we can get through the 260. Mm-hmm. And thank you all for being here and in the room. Like, you know, what a room and what a packed room. I'm excited. Now, Scott, We were talking earlier, and there's one thing I think everyone can already hear. We have similar accents, but they're both a little bit confused. And I think mostly because if we add it up, together we have spent over 58 years in Australia. Neither one of us quite sounds that way, but that's a long time, and I've dated and aged us in one sentence. But I'm going to take you back to the beginning. Right? I'm looking forward to kind of bringing us back to the present and hearing all about Sydney Airport. But let's go back to the beginning and just take us through, formative years, your early experiences, the things that really shaped you.
So with the accent, so I was born in Houston, Texas, and raised in a small town outside of Dallas. So if you ever see the show Friday Night Lights, that was my high school sort of life, but I was a basketball player, so it wasn't as popular as football, but it was all about sports. Went to a public high school, and I always wanted to be an architect, so I'm a frustrated architect because I can't draw. So I went to my high school counselor when I was ready for university, and they said, well, that's really interesting, but you're terrible at being creative, but you're really good at math. So why don't you go do something like engineering? So I said, well, and at the time I didn't know what I wanted to do. And then I said, so what's the hardest engineering to do? And they said, well, for those civil engineers in this room, sorry, it's electrical engineering. Let's just be clear. Electrical engineering at the top, and then you move down. Civil engineering is still the way the Egyptians did it. So, nothing's really changed there. So I went and did electrical engineering. So that was sort of the start of it. I went to the biggest university by people in Texas, which is Texas A&M. We had a program in alignment with NASA, which was really interesting. Yeah. So had a great time there. I don't know if you want me to keep going with.
No, I love it. Sorry, I just have to remember I'm asking you questions. I'm enthralled. And you got your MBA. I'm going to say my school is number one, where I went. But you also went on to do your MBA, right?
Yeah. So I finished electrical engineering, and I thought, well, what do engineers do? They go to work doing engineering. So I went to work for Texas Instruments. So my first job was designing laser guidance systems for bombs. So if you ever saw those smart bombs during the Iraqi war, that's what I was working on with a whole group of engineers. And I was sitting in this massive floor with all these electrical engineers, and I would talk to them and say, how long have you been working on this circuit? And they said, well, 6 years. And the next one was like, how long? 70 years. So I thought, probably not for me. It just wasn't. I have a short attention span. But I noticed all the managers were MBAs. And at the time, that was all the rage, to get your MBA and be an engineer. So I went and got my MBA and specialized in finance. So that was a lot of fun, and then moved into sort of the investment banking area after that. Very
good. Now tell us what brought you to Australia.
So I got into, so I'm quite old, as you can tell, but there was a savings and loan crisis in the U.S., and I got involved in reshaping bank portfolios in Texas and then Northeast, and I got involved in municipal bonds and infrastructure, but basically burnt myself out over sort of 3 years, and I thought, okay, I'll travel the world. So I spent a year backpacking. When you're from Texas, that's a weird thing. So I'm sort of a black sheep, and all my family's still there. But spent a year traveling around the world, went into China, into Tibet when it wasn't open, went behind the Iron Curtain. For those of you who don't know who the Iron Curtain is, went behind the Iron Curtain. So did all these things you weren't supposed to do, which was quite exciting, but fell in love with Australia, went back, and then decided to come out here for a couple of years in 1993, and never left other than the time in Hong Kong.
And here you are.
And here I am.
Now, we were talking earlier, and you reflected on your career that really it was a series of taking risks. And I always think, when you look at someone's very distinguished careers, it always looks very planned. It always looks like you knew exactly what you were doing, very calculated, deliberate moves. And you referenced it as taking a series of risks. Take us through some of that. What were some of those moves? What were those risks?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So with all of it, and I tell anyone that would talk to me, is just take the risk, because you always can go back to doing what you were doing if you're good at it. Yeah. Came out to Australia, started doing investment banking, was very much involved in all of the privatizations in the 90s, which was the airports, all the power, learned so much. I lived at the Crown Hotel for basically a year, didn't leave that in Victoria for going through that process, and learned so much. And then that sort of ended, and then they said, hey, why don't you go to Hong Kong and run, the transport practice for Asia? And I said, I didn't know anything about that, but sure, I'll go try that, and went and did that for a while. And it was interesting. I lost my sort of passion because I'd progressed so much up the investment banking chain that I was just doing client management. And that's not my favorite thing to do. I mean, I enjoy being here tonight, but that's not my favorite thing to do, is whining and dining. My favorite thing is actually doing. And so I got so high up, I stopped doing. And one of my big clients at the time, Leighton Holdings, which was about to go through a big growth spurt, said, would you come back and work for us? I took 2/3 of a salary cut to take that job. And it's hilarious because all my investment banking friends, and then I've gone on to be lucky enough to be successful, have said, well, how do I do that now? And I said, well, you should have done it 20 years ago when I did it. But nobody was prepared to take a 2/3 pay cut. But I'd lost the passion. I wanted to do something different. And I thought the worst case is it doesn't work out and I'll go back. And the same thing happened when I went to Lendlease, and the same thing happened when I went to Transurban. Not the same thing at the airport. Well, not going anywhere, David. So, but I think it's just taking those calculated risks, because you can always go back if you're good at it. You can always go back and do what you were doing. So that's been one of the, I guess, foundations of my career.
Yeah, I love it. Did any of those risks not quite pay off? Doesn't feel that way.
Well, no. There was some really hard times with all of that. And we can talk about, having your 3-year plan and your sort of 10-year plan and how you want to progress through that. But my end at my end at Leighton Holdings was not planned, and was a result of a takeover happening, and as a CFO being asked to do things that I had a big problem with from an integrity point of view. And so I refused to do some things that management and the shareholders, or half the shareholders, asked me to do, and that ended up costing my job, and I thought could have costed my career. And the interesting thing that I learned out of all that, which many of you should take, I think, heed to, is that at the end of the day with all this, you just have your integrity and your reputation. And you will potentially get called upon to do things at certain times that you question whether they're right or wrong. And I can tell you in hindsight, they will always look wrong if they're questionable. And I refused to do it. It cost me my job at the time, and it cost me friends, and it cost me potentially my career. But luckily, I was able to come out the other side, and people who really knew who I was gave me more opportunities. I went on to be COO of Lendlease and then move on to Transurban.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. In that moment, like, how did you personally work through that, right? And like, how important, and mentors or what influences? How did you work through that?
Yeah, well, it's your best friends and your family. There was some on the mentor side. I actually had one mentor saying, no, it's okay, just finesse it, which I was surprised at, no longer a mentor. Because it always seems a bit gray at the time, but it wasn't. I think it wasn't. The one thing I've learned as CEO over time, and I've been a CEO for a while now, is you do have to kind of trust your gut. And if it just doesn't feel right, then... And it was really my best friends, and I said, look, this is the situation, this is how I feel about it, I just can't, I just think it's wrong, I just can't do it. And at the end of the day, I wasn't prepared to sacrifice my integrity for a few dollars, or to continue on with some group of people at the time then I lost respect for because of what they were asking me to do. So it was almost a double-edged sword. Even if I was to do it, I couldn't stay there because I couldn't work with these people, having put me in that position.
Thank you. Can we talk about Transurban?
Sure.
Right? You had a successful 10 years, high growth, excellent profitability, transformation. What are you most proud of in that time?
Yeah, no, it's interesting with Transurban because everyone says, oh, it's greatly successful and everything. I can tell you the first 2 years, nobody thought it was successful. I can remember walking in, so the way that Transurban worked out is I was at Lendlease. We were at that time a $20 billion market cap. Transurban was about 6 or 7. I got a call from a recruiter who said, we'd like you to potentially pitch this job at Transurban. And I said, not interested. So he called me back a week later and said, look, we really like you to pitch this job. And I said, look, you have to understand. And I was in the industry. We were contractors, and I've been in the industry. I said, nobody likes Transurban. Nobody want to work with Transurban. The government hates Transurban. They're arrogant. They're expensive. You're not doing anything with the assets. Just not interested. So he called back a week later, and he said, would you mind telling the board that? And I said, I really don't think that's a good idea. And I knew one of the board members, and they said, look, just, I think it's important because they're considering where they're going, what they're doing. I think it's important. You'd be good. Come down. So went down to Transurban, walked in, so the board's sitting there, and they're considering what they're going to do for the CEO. And they said, what would you do? And I said, well, the way you're running the company, I would wind up the company and sell all the assets because you're not doing anything with them. You should sell them to the super funds because you're not creating value. I got very quiet. And you tell a listed board they should delist. And they said, okay, we get that. So what would you do? And I said, look, if I was to do it, I'd leverage the networks. You have to reset all the relationships with government to be a more partnership approach. You have to try and solve their problems. You've been creating problems. You're expensive. You're arrogant sometimes and difficult to work with. So walked out of that and thought, well, that was a waste of a trip. So the sad thing was I got a call a week later from the chair, and they said, that's kind of the direction we want to go. Mm. And I went home to my wife, and I go, oh, my God, I don't know what to do here. I sort of put that out there without really a plan, and then had to put a plan in place, and ended up getting the job. And to the board's credit and the chairman's credit, Lindsay Maxted backed me 100%. Rechanged the team, rechanged the focus, and we had some really tough times the first year. I had my major shareholder saying, what are you doing? You should sell out of the U.S. We had people saying, I'm an ex-investment banker, I was going to blow the company up. It was all this negative stuff, and then we got a couple of wins, and it just kept growing, and we were doing what we said we'd do. We reset the relationships. We got lucky. We won a $7 billion transaction by less than 1%. You got to have luck as well as, I'd rather be lucky than good kind of thing. But we got lucky, and so we built that momentum. So in hindsight, everyone's like, oh, well, well done. But it was a tough 2 or 3 years. But once you got that momentum going and have a solid board behind you, had a really good team, had some really good shareholders. One of them's in the room here. Often, thank you. Some really good shareholders that backed me for a long time. It was quite fun, but it was a tough start.
I said we all said there's 260 questions, but mine go first. What are you truly most proud of in that period?
Well, what I'm truly most proud of is, I think, the careers that were launched out of that. So there's a lot of people at Transurban that are running different companies now. I think that's what I've always been proud of, is if I look at what we referred to as the Deutsche Mafia in the 90s, yep. Rob Scott's running Wesfarmers. Rob used to work for me. Peter Regan's running Metro Trains. He used to work for me. We've got APA. We've got Adam Watson. So all these people that we all work together, and they've all gone to be super successful. And really proud of that. And really proud, and again, with the shareholders in here, there was a lot of trust. We went out, the first big transaction we did, we raised 1/3 of our market cap. And my biggest shareholder at the time called me into his office on a Saturday and just gave me an absolute grilling. And I said, look, trust me, I've got this. And all the trust that these people put in me and our team, and we've been able to deliver for them. So I'm proud that we delivered on what we said we would do, because there was a lot of risk they took on and a lot of trust. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you.
Sorry.
Good answer. We got that. So why'd you leave, right? At that point, you know where I was going. It really, successful 10 years, still going really well, great momentum. Why leave?
So there's a few reasons. So it's interesting that, I've watched Australia, and there's been a lot of very successful CEOs who, I won't name them, but over time, and I'm not talking about recent ones as well, but past ones, who stayed for too long, and they were just considered the best in the industry. But then, because they stayed a little bit longer, reputations change, things change, and I've seen it as well, is once you get to that sort of 10-year mark, you're such a expert, subject matter expert, but you also have such a dominant personality in a company that's been successful. It's hard not to have people around you just agreeing with everything you said and not challenging you. So when I took the job at Transurban, I said to my very best friend, if I get to 10 years, no matter what I say, you got to tell me to go. So I got to 10 years, and he said, 10 years. I said, oh, I'm doing pretty good. I said, this is not that hard now. I've got the rhythm, I got this. But the other thing is I think I started getting a bit cynical, and I got a bit cynical about the listed space. I got a little bit cynical about some of the stuff happening. I think I got a bit too confident maybe, and I could see it in myself, maybe losing a bit of the passion and the drive for that particular area. So I just said, and the company was in really good shape. I had spent, and we can go back to one of my toughest decisions, but I'd spent time developing 2 excellent internal candidates, and it was just time to go. Yeah.
How difficult was it in making that decision to walk away?
I don't know. It's difficult to leave your friends, but when you leave the legacy, I'm very proud of the legacy. I don't know. It wasn't actually as difficult as people think. I think a lot of people thought it would be difficult. This isn't my favorite thing to do, public speaking or do investor roadshows or anything. So I didn't need the limelight. I satisfied my ego in other ways. The thing I always remember is from Jerry Maguire when he walks out of when he gets fired, or he walks out and he goes to the elevator and the door closes and there's like 2 seconds of people and then everything just goes back. So I knew once I left Transurban, with 5 minutes, Transurban just carries on. The biggest thing I could do was leave a legacy that now allows Transurban to go to the next level and takes the next step. Because if you look at the psychology, one of the things I really enjoy studying is the psychology of decision making and the psychology of leadership. If you get an iconic leader and you don't get the right handoff and the right timing, or iconic's not the right word, sorry. If you get a decent run and you hand it off, the companies tend to underperform. And I spent a lot of time, and we can talk about again my hard decision in the last years, making sure we were set up for success in the future.
Excellent. And as you approached that decision and worked it through, what were you thinking about in terms of next? Were you thinking about it? Were you deliberate, or were you going to figure it out?
Very deliberate. And I think from a leadership point of view, and we can talk about some of this, and may come through the questions about knowing who you are and what drives you and really what's important to you and what gives you energy. Being around listed boards, and chairs are very important, more important than the CEO. But outside of that, looking at non-executive directorships and partial work, I like to have an impact. I want to make a difference. And I just think sometimes with different situations, with a non-executive director, yes, you can have input, but can you really make a difference? So I want to make a difference. So I didn't want to go down at this point, the non-executive director route. I didn't want to do the consulting thing, and I wanted to make a difference. So I thought another leadership position, wasn't really sure where it would be, but when the most iconic asset comes up in Australia, I was pretty excited to have that opportunity. Yeah. But I had no plan at the time. But I took a good advice from the chair of Sydney Airport to do something that you're passionate and love. So, yeah.
Excellent. So you're coming up on 1 year in the role. Yeah. When you stepped in, take us through a bit of the transition in, right? Say that first 3 to 6 months. What were the most important things? How did you approach the transition into the new role?
Yeah, the most important thing was before the new role. So I think what I learned at Transurban, it took me a good 2 or 3 years to set the strategy, get the culture, get the team I wanted, and get that set up. So you're a new CEO, you kind of don't know. I've been a CFO, I've been around listed companies, but I wasn't totally sure what I was doing. So I was a bit unsure of myself, and it took a bit of time. So I pretty much knew if I was going to come to Sydney Airport what I needed to do. So most of the hard work was done before I got the job. So it's interesting that the interview process was both ways.
Yeah.
So I was being extensively interviewed by the investors, but I was extensively interviewing them saying, you sure, you know what you're going to get with me, you know what I like to do, I need you guys aligned. That was the biggest thing, that they were aligned. I need everyone aligned. This is how I. So it was an interview process both ways this time, so that when I got in the job, what I'd probably done in 2 or 3 years at Transurban, we were able to do in a very short time. But it wasn't a drastic change. Like Transurban was moving 180 degrees. Sydney was already on its way. It was just sort of consolidating what a lot of good work had been done and setting it probably on a more ambitious growth path. Because everything from my personality, every company that I've been involved with has been around growth and ambition, because that's what I enjoy. It's a lot funner to hire people than it is to fire people, although unfortunately I've had to fire my share of people. But yeah, so all the companies I've been associated with are growth. And I know, different personalities and different situations, but I think, again, knowing what gives you passion and knowing what you enjoy is so important.
Excellent. I mean, that said, coming into Sydney Airport, no one would say that airports, airlines, the industry has had an easy time, right, over the past few years. So when you came in, what were the top 3 things?
The top 3 things, well, the first thing was the relationships, I think, with all the stakeholders, and the culture of the company, and just setting it on the foundations for growth and getting the leadership team. So there were some changes to the leadership team, which all new CEOs do and bring in. So there's promotions internally, bringing in talent to bring that diversity. I'm a huge believer in diversity, but diversity of thought. And you can't have diversity of thought without diversity of gender. But I think a lot of companies talk about diversity, but diversity of thought to me is the most important thing. So it was really culture, the leadership, and resetting the relationship, particularly with our largest airline partner in Qantas.
Yeah, very good. And what are you seeing, coming in? Take us through the ambition that you've set, and what do you see as the biggest opportunities?
Well, so we're currently doing, as David said, just over 40 million passengers a year. We, by 2050, want to be doing close to 80 million, so more than doubling the airport. There's a huge challenges in operations, given the complexity. There's a huge challenge in relation to the regulatory environment, and I'm in front of the Senate inquiry tomorrow, so it's my least favorite thing. In front of the Senate inquiry on legislation tomorrow, but that's good. So there's all these pieces of the puzzle, and that's one of the things that I really love about the airport, is it's so complicated, but then getting the airlines actually competing now, finding what drives the airlines, doing the data analysis on. We're now doing the data analysis on each city, each airline, each reason for origin, destination, changing in the aircraft fleet, what's happening in the demographics, what's going to happen with WSI. So it's extremely complex, which I find really exciting, and a giant puzzle. So, but it's setting that culture of ambition, which I always find in companies is a bit odd. So I remember at Transurban when I first came in, and I sat down with the leadership team, and I said, okay, we want to be, I think we were top 30 ASX, and I'd do some other things. I said, look, we want to be top 20 by, I think, 5 years. And I remember the first leadership team, at least half of them said, well, why would you set us up for failure? Why are you doing this? And I said, because I think we can. Here's the pathway. I think we can do that. And it's like, why are you setting us up for failure? Anyway, we did it in 3 years. And part of those people that said that were no longer with us, because some people that scares them, that ambition. But I think, and then we did it again and said, okay, we want to be top 10, but we continued to work through it, but in obviously creating value and identifying the opportunities. And a lot of times we didn't know where the opportunities were. There were gaps, and then we set about, you fill in the gap, as opposed to you can see what's in front of you. And I think with Sydney as an airport as well, which we talked about the board with David, so it's no surprise. When I first got there, almost everyone said, that's what's in the corporate plan. That's what's in the corporate plan. And I said, so we just do what's in the corporate plan. You don't want to do better than that. You don't want to do more than the corporate plan. So we don't talk about the corporate plan anymore. We talk about what is our longer-term ambition, what are we trying to achieve, what could we achieve, not that's what's in the corporate plan, so we'll just do the minimum.
And, challenging that culture and motivating and inspiring a team to achieve that. Just take us through, like, your method tactics. How do you bring people along?
There's multiple different ways. I think the one thing I learned when I was in investment banking, everyone was a type A, personality, so it's easy to motivate because they're all the same, or we were, at the time. And then moving into Leighton's and moving into others, everyone's there for a different reason. So it's having to understand each person on the leadership team and what's going to appeal. Some people just want to, create a better passenger experience. Some people want to see the operations run smoother. Some people want to get the financial returns. So you got to bring everyone along, but I think it's creating the momentum so that they understand that they can do more as a team than they ever thought. And once you start building that momentum, it's amazing how it changes the thinking and it changes the attitude, and you start thinking about, okay, well, we can do much more than we thought. We'll just keep going. And then again, it's all things about not criticizing people for trying, or not, criticizing, people when they fail, but trying to create the opportunities and understanding what is a very complex motivation. I won't tell you my only management saying I have, which I don't share widely, because I only share it with the leadership team. David probably won't like this, but I used to have someone in Transurban that was the leadership team, because I'd say, we're going to do this, right? We just find a way to do this. And he kept coming to me and saying, Scott, what is plan B? What is plan B? And I said, no, we're just going to get this done. We just have to get this done. No, but what is plan B? So I got so sick of hearing that. I said, right. Plan B is to replace the executives who will execute plan A. So I never got asked about what plan B was again. But I think that was the other, and I don't know if it's going to come up with the questions, but I think one of the questions earlier was sort of what is one of my unique traits or habits that I think has been very helpful. And I think one of the things that I've done accidentally, and I don't think it's by learning and everything, but I always solve problems backwards. So I don't start at the beginning and think, well, how do I get there in the end? I always start with the outcome that we're going to do, and then I try to work backwards every single scenario or every single step that I have to do to get back to where I'm beginning, and making time to have those thoughts. So I actually go around and look at all my leadership team's diaries, and if they have back-to-back meetings, they will get pinged by me, and I'll just take meetings out of I'll just tell my EA to take meetings out of their diary, because if they're not spending a couple hours a day thinking about the problem and how to solve it, then they're not adding value as a leadership team.
Excellent. I like that tactic and that saying, by the way. We're all going to back pocket those. You spoke...
Not very motivational.
I think we all like them. But you spoke about being at Transurban, right? You knew your stakeholders, like it was almost in your instincts, right? How to lead in that environment, how to lead the organization after 10 years. And then you moved to Sydney Airport, right? Really, different industry, it's private. How have you worked through like the learning, the making the decisions? How has that been different as you moved into something that was new?
Yeah, and it's an interesting transition that anyone goes to CEO. So you go from, particularly when I was in investment banking, the loudest person in the room, you want your voice to be heard, you've got to stand up. Then when you're CFO, again, you're trying to be loud. And then you go to CEO, and then nobody wants to talk. You need to listen. So the hard thing is moved to listening. Now, it's easy taking over the CEO job at Sydney Airport to listen, because I didn't know anything about aviation. Knew a lot about the construction and stakeholders and the finance, but I had to listen, and I'm learning enough to be dangerous, and I'm learning enough that still a lot of it doesn't make sense, common sense, but I'm still learning. So, and that's exciting, again, is that learning and that interest. And I don't come it with a biased view, so I can ask dumb questions and how we might go about sort of solving things. So, yeah, it's hard to step back and listen, but particularly as a CEO, you've got to be so careful that everyone is heard in the room, because you go back to being, half your executives are extroverts, half are introverts. the extroverts always get sort of the attention. And I've also learned this over time with boards, that the boards always think the extroverts are the better executives. Yep. We're always find actually the introverts are the better executives. They just don't present well to the board. So you have to balance all of that. You have to balance all that out.
Very good. Now we need to move to audience Q&A. I didn't get through half of mine, but let's see how we go. I know there'll be some great questions. We've got some roving mics going for whoever has a question. Got one in front.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Scott. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for facilitating. And I just want to ask, with the aging population, sustainability, and you also mentioned about operations. So, what do you see the role of technology, AI, play, and what is the biggest challenge?
Yeah, well, I'd like to see technology play a bigger role, but unfortunately, with border force and some of the government procedures and processes, it's hard to get technology introduced quickly. But certainly, we're planning for the use of biometrics and making the whole passenger journey much simpler. You scan your bags in LA, they go all the way through to your connecting flight. So it's coming. We use AI now on trying to manage security and passengers. So bits and pieces of it. So a lot of it's coming. The good thing about an aging population is they have a lot of money and they all want to travel. So that's a good thing for the airport. We've got to work on our sort of disability access and other things, but it's probably a bigger issue for government and their funding going forward than it is for the airport, but it looks good. I was just on a panel with Cam Wallace, who's head of Qantas International, talking about how they're seeing the spending on premium product rising so quickly because of the aging population. So again, part of our growth story. But the technology one is a difficult one when you're dealing with so many different regulatory and government agencies who we're very slow to adopt technology compared to Singapore or our overseas colleagues.
Excellent. There's a question right there. Just put your hand up.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Marlene. I was just wondering which advice you would give to an aspiring CEO, and which struggles did you face when trying to get your first C-level job?
It's a really good question. There's two probably of my strongest advices would be, besides taking risk, and I know one of the questions was about mentors, and mentors are great. I've used mentors from time to time, but sponsors are what you need. You need a sponsor. The reason I've been so successful is each of the organizations I was in, I had a very strong sponsor, and I never said no to what they wanted me to do. So they asked me to do something, yes, I'll do that. I didn't know. I used to call my dad, and I'd say in investment banking, hey, they want me to privatize a gas pipeline. And he'd go, you don't know anything about that. I said, I know, but it doesn't matter. So I think sponsors is the most important thing, and they're the ones that will really help your career. The mentors are good for balance and for thinking about, but I think wherever you are, you have to have an internal sponsor to be successful. And then going back to, sorry, what was the other question? Sorry about that. Oh, CEO. So I always get concerned when someone says they want to be a CEO. There's a lot of millennials that tell me they want to be CEO. I never wanted to be a CEO. I thought the pinnacle of my career, I always wanted to be a CFO. I like the numbers, I like this, I like that. And then after I left Leighton and went to Lend-Lease and was chief operating officer, because I really like construction and I like the physical side of the business, seeing the physical side of the business. They gave me people and culture, and then I had to deal with all that, and I thought, oh, that's pretty interesting. I'll move there. But it always worries me when someone says they want to be a CEO, because I don't think people a lot of times understand what it really means to be a CEO, and I think you have to have a broad depth of operations, finance, people, to be able to consider even if you're right for that role before you think, how do I get there? So I think the aspiration. And I always think it's good to know a little bit about a lot rather than a lot about a little if you want to be a CEO. But it's to get that broad experience and then really think, do you really? Because it's not for everyone. And I've seen some really bad ones. In fact, I don't know if it's 50-50, but there's a lot of people who want to be CEO and they're not really kind of cut out for it to necessarily. And the one that I really can't stand with CEOs is I hear people saying, I want to be a CEO. And I go, well, what kind of company do you want to be a CEO or what? It doesn't matter. I just want to be a CEO. And I think for me, it took me a while to learn, you have to learn these lessons. I think, the passion and the authenticity and being yourself, and I use humor and I can be, I can come across different ways sometimes to different people, but I know who I am, but I also know my weaknesses and my strengths. But one of the things that I think makes me an okay CEO is that I have the passion, and people see that, and the authenticity of who I am. If you try to fake that you like this, like if someone put me in retail and said, okay, we want you to, I just wouldn't be me. That's just not what I do, or something else. And so I think that broad experience, that to say if you really want it, and then that authenticity, you can get a lot of high-paying jobs without being CEO. And CEO can be a very lonely place. But it can also be incredibly rewarding.
Wonderful advice. We have another question in the back, but I'm going to ask you one while we get there. Sure. It is a very demanding job, right? You've been CEO multiple times. How do you manage your energy?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit below. So it's a strange one, I'm what's called an ambivert. So I can be an incredible extrovert, so I can hold a room, I can do all that good stuff that you have to do and meet with politicians and all that kind of stuff. And then after a certain period of time, I'm just done. I don't want anything to do with people, and just leave me alone, and I'll put my headphones in at work, and I just have to just recharge. So outside of work, I like to bushwalk. I just spend time with my family. I like to spend time on the water, on the harbor, but I just basically do nothing. And I have not a creative bone in my body when it comes to like singing, and people are like, what's your hobby? So my hobby, this is really sad, my hobby is work. So the only creativity I have is solving like really complex problems. So, when I'm sitting there on holiday, with my book going, okay, now if we could get those slots and we could do this, that's what interests me when I'm on my downtime, which is very sad, but it's my passion.
There's probably plenty of other ambiverts in the room, but are you open with your team on that so they understand when the headphones go in what that means? Yes,
and we have extreme extroverts and extreme introverts on this, so we're all over the place, which is good. But yeah, they understand when the headphones go in, or I just say I'm done and I'm going home. So.
Excellent. Okay, there was a hand up. Sorry, I snuck in. There you go.
Hi, Scott. My name is Apurv. So I'm an engineer myself, and one thing about the engineers is we love to optimize things. So from your perspective, when you are talking about optimizing operations, there's the optimizing the cost, there's optimizing the efficiencies. And probably to the gentleman's question, AI can potentially do that. But is that really the course you would like to take for the next 5 years, 10 years? Because that would really mean reduction in the workforce. And the second part of my question is really about the AI biases that would come with it, especially in the security industry where you're really trading on a certain set of data, which probably mean somebody like me with a black beard could be highlighted 5 more times than usual. So how would you overcome those biases with AI?
So when I'm talking about AI and security, it's moving through the bag, looking at the bags and looking at not the individual, the people. That's still going to be people-driven. But I think, going forward, as a CEO, particularly for a large company, the thing that you can affect most is strategy, culture, and people. So I can't really get down into the details of the operation. But I know at Sydney Airport, if we don't do our business as usual, we don't have a good passenger experience, and we don't do the basics right, we can't do the really fun growth things and bring in the new airlines and all this stuff. So it's incredibly important to get the BAU right, and I've got someone who does BAU, and then I've got people that do the other things. In relation to how we get the AI right, there's a lot of, in the real world, for me or for us, there's a lot of just trial and error. So we'll trial things and we'll see how it goes. And a lot of times it fails. But I think there's this view that there's just some sort of arching black box that we all have this amazing capability, but it's a lot of just trial and error of systems and how we can go and what we can do. And particularly difficult in our regulatory environment because we're having to always get certification or, we never put anything at jeopardy from a security or that sort of operations base, which is really interesting because safety, and coming back from an engineering, so safety is paramount and the number one thing at the airport. And I always take the Intel example for those of you who've ever had Intel, that studied Intel. So Intel has, when they create a chip, they have the most creative designers in the world. They create the new microchip. They're out there incredibly creative in how they're going to go about creating new microchips. And then when they build them, the factory, no matter where it's built, is 100% down to the micron, the exact same. So they have to create a culture within one organization that allows for creativity and taking tons of risk to taking zero risk on the other side. And so that can be hard, particularly in infrastructure. You've got the safety side, and then you've got the creativity side when we're trying to do deals with the airlines or retail or whatever we might do. So I've just gone off on a tangent, but it's a lot of trial and error. But as an engineer, and I think engineering, the best thing, it taught me how to solve problems. I think one thing, though, is I'm very much the 80-20 kind of person. So if I've got 80% of the information, I'll make the decision, always can correct that decision. Again, you've all heard it, which I completely agree. The worst decision is no decision, then the wrong decision. And so, I think you get as much of the data set as you can, and everything is data-driven. I borrow a lot of sayings from other people, including you've probably all heard, "In God we trust, all others bring data." So, the first thing a lot of people will say to me is like, "We'd like to make this investment," and I'm saying, "Okay, great. Where's the business case?" I think, "Well, we just come back with the data." So, I think I just rambled on quite a bit there, but hopefully I've kind of answered your question.
Good answer. Now, you could see that the screen was screaming at us, and unbelievably, we've come to the end. But I am going to make us finish on 3 rapid fires, but we better be rapid, okay? First one is best advice you've ever received that you would pay forward.
The best advice was always say yes. And I think one of the problems is I've promoted a lot of women in my time, and again, trying to get diversity, it's always hard to get the women to say yes. I have to convince them sometimes to take the job. The men will just take it even if they're not qualified, and the women, if they're overqualified, a lot of times are like, "I'm not sure I could do it." I'm like, "Oh my God, just take the job." So say yes to any opportunity.
Excellent, love it. I'm listening. Okay, if you could have dinner with any leader, past or present, who would it be?
Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, good choice. Okay.
The burden of, I don't know how, if you've seen some of the movies or read some of the books, the burden of leadership, trying to hold his party together, putting that many people in harm's way, dealing, Abraham. I mean, sometimes I feel the burden of leadership and I go, "Oh, yeah, really?" But, so.
All right, last one.
Yes.
Top quality you look for in other leaders, emerging leaders.
The top quality I look for is the authenticity and the passion. And I think, and it probably doesn't come across the way I presented tonight, but humility or understanding who you are is so important. There's so many leaders today that when they become successful, they lose that humility. And I think maybe that was a past trait that could work, but not in today's world. And continuing to question yourself, question, again, who you are. So I think it's that passion, authenticity, and you have to be, you have to have levels of humility and not think that you know all the answers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I can say through all of that, authenticity, humility, the ability to listen, all of that came through magically. Yeah, as well as, again, your accomplishments over a long period of time. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights with us. I had a lot of fun. I hope you did too. I do want to welcome up our vote of thanks to finish off the evening before we can get back together and have a few drinks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Genevieve Castellino, and I'm delighted to be giving the vote of thanks this evening. I'd like to start off by extending our sincere appreciation to Scott Charlton and Ellen Derrick for delivering an exceptionally insightful and thought-provoking conversation. Your dynamic exchange of ideas have truly enriched our event and has not only provided valuable insights into leadership and growth strategies, but has also highlighted the importance of mentorship in shaping successful careers. To acknowledge our gratitude, a donation will be made to the UNSW Business School Educational Resource Access Scheme on your behalf. This scheme supports the inclusion and success of students from equity groups enrolled at UNSW Sydney in first-year undergraduate business programs. As mentioned, Scott and Ellen's interview has been recorded, and the full interview will be available on the UNSW Business School's YouTube channel and website. We value your feedback and would love to hear your thoughts on today's conversations. What are your key takeaways from today's engaging conversations between Scott and Ellen? We invite you to share your thoughts and reflections on the valuable insights they provided via the QR code on the screen, or through the link that will be shared with you via email. This brings our Meet the CEO interview to a close. Please feel free to stay a little while longer and join us for networking, canapes, and refreshments. We hope you found the evening valuable and are taking away some new learnings. Thank you all for attending, and have a great evening. Bye.